So to start it off, this is our front fold configuration of the 2100 series planter. Available in 30-inch row configuration, or we can make it our 2150S, S for splitter, so we could do a 15, 30 splitter or 20-inch rows on this style of toolbar. We talked real briefly, Cat 3 pins, put the bushings on it when you couple for that first time. When you're plugging your hoses into the back of the tractor, we actually forced ourselves, we put hose retainers here so that I want you to put your hydraulic hoses under your quick hitch. Don't go over the quick hitch, because when you go through the fold sequence, that takes those hoses up awful high, and we start rocking and twisting those hoses in the couplers. Color-coded caps, we talked a little bit about that. Most importantly, here's that odd man out, that case drain. This is where we just gotta let this oil leak back into your tractor. So what tractor are you gonna pull it with? 215, okay. 215, we'll have to change the tip style. It won't actually just plug into your tractor. For the green tractor operators in the room, this is not ISO compatible with your green tractor, so you have to figure out which one you're gonna combat to. But the concept is the same. Deere has a case drain. Right here is that pressure sensor I talked about. If it doesn't see where this hose is plugged in, it's gonna start shutting your planter down for you. It'll warn you in the display before we do damage. Some of the attributes of the Case IH planter, these stainless steel tubes are designed to be radiators. It helps to take the heat load off your tractor. Our friends in the factory could have run rubber hoses down here, but those hold heat. Stainless steel tubes radiate heat. It's a great idea until you've been running all day long and you come out here to grab a hold of these and get underneath the planter to go check something. They get warm. Teach yourself to find the red piece to help you crawl underneath the drawbar. As we look at the planter, the attributes, the systems on the toolbar from this side, liquid fertilizer. I see a hydraulically driven fertilizer pump. There's a little pressure gauge. This is what's known as a wet seal pump. This wet seal pump needs to see pressure in there. We want to see 15 to 30 pounds. I want it to be in the green. Make sure the needle's in the green. That way we know that that center of that pump has pressure in it and it will protect the seal. It is also lubricated. There's a sight glass right above it. We want to make sure that that oil or that barrier fluid that's in there, it's not oil, is clear. It's not cloudy. If it's cloudy or milky, that means it's contaminated and it's time to replace that fluid and probably replace that pump seal. The benefits of that wet seal pump is we don't have to worry about running this pump if the tank goes empty. You know, we can plant out, get all the fertilizer out of it, and it won't immediately damage that seal. That seal is very, very durable. So when the planter is set up, we'll see that it's pressurized. We'll want to check that pressure at the start of the season. Make sure there's oil in it. So that's a little bit about our fertilizer pump system. The 2150 planters have an optional wing downforce. So we see a hydraulic cylinder right above our wing flex joint. We can take, and through our display, adjust the amount of wing downforce where we spread more weight out to those outer carrying wheels in the outer end of our toolbar, adjustable through the display. So that's wing downforce. Our 2140s have that option as well. So that is something that would be commanded through the display. We can go into a lot more detail when we start discussing that. I'm going to keep working down the toolbar here so you guys can, don't mind, step around behind me. Air compressor. If your planter is equipped with pneumatic cleaning system or closing system. You'll get the air compressor, hydraulically driven. We talked about the hydraulic hoses already. Sight glass for quick and simple oil level check. Just like everything else, if we have to add oil or change oil between seasons, we want to see a 1540 or a 1550 synthetic engine oil into this compressor. No different than the engine of the tractor. It's got a crankshaft, it's got pistons, it's got a connecting rod. It just doesn't have a fuel system. So put engine oil in it. 2 air filters. So planting in dusty conditions, we've got the ability to pull very low volume air into our air compressor, get a long life out of these filters. But when the time is right, remove them, tap them out, or replace them. But the whole intention is lots of longevity and capacity out of our air filter. Part of daily maintenance when we get in the heart of the season includes draining your air compressor tank. It's about a 5-gallon tank with an air compressor drain. If we haven't drained this off, we start building water. Next thing you know, we're down to a 4-gallon tank, a 3-gallon tank, a 2-gallon tank, and our air compressor will cycle. Air compressor will cycle more. It doesn't care, it's got a lot of capacity, but you start rusting out the bottom of your tank. So remember, drain off your air compressor, get rid of that. For the different functions in the pneumatic system, we have a bank of valves out here with a relief valve, and there's also the ability to bleed off those systems by manually pushing on the little valves on the buttons here. So, as you're working through the day, as you're setting your planter up, run your planter, get all your systems up to pressure, shut the engine off, listen for leaks. No different than your semi-trucks. We don't want the air compressor running any more than we have to. You know how trucks get. Over time, you can have a truck that's tight and hold its air and doesn't bleed it off. Or if we've modified a bunch of these lines or something's pinched, you'll hear air bleeding off. Otherwise, the air system takes care of itself very well. Questions on the air compressor? Markers are an option. We sell an awful lot of planters with markers, but not all of them. If you are not running markers on your planter, there is a weight frame where we'll actually want to see some suitcase weights out on the ends of your marker, where your marker mount would be. The point of that, if we're going to use delta force to allow down force to push that row unit in the ground, unless I've got enough mass out here that I use my wing down force for, I might need that actual weight for the balance of my toolbar. While we're standing here looking at it, you'll notice the style of tires. On the red planters, we do put the IF increased Flexion style ag tire on our toolbars to protect that root growing zone. We can run less air pressure in that tire than a comparable semi-truck tire to get less compaction between our rows. So it's all about protecting that seed and that root growing zone. Let's start walking around. We'll go around the other side of the planter here. We'll talk a little bit about the bulk fill system. As we walk past the hitch, just walk past the one daily grease point. The one daily grease zerk on your planter, it's right back here on the pivot pin. Hides down underneath the clevis. That's the one that we would like to see greased. As you go through rolling terrain, you'll see that walk and talk a little bit. Okay. My planter hasn't been running, so I can put my arms on the steel pipes. How many guys are on their fourth or fifth season on a 2000 series planter with bulk fill? Anybody? Yeah? How is your bulk fill performance? Are you able to keep seed out to your end rows?
We weren't. We found out about the filter in the tank.
Okay.
We didn't know about it for years.
It's a really forgiving system until that system has a few birthday candles on it, right? So, what we're referring to here, on bulk fill planters, the technical name is the inductor box here. The inductor box is where we mix air coming in with the bottom of our seed to suspend and boil that seed before we blow it out to the ends of the rows. So, we have a seed gate. If I have seed in my tank, I slide my seed gate in. What that does is that locks all the seed up there except for maybe a 5-gallon bucket worth of seed. I can trip these little doors to get into the bottom of my inductor box. In the inductor box, the pressurized air comes in from my bulk fill fan, and it fills a chamber essentially back here. And that chamber of air, then some of it migrates up into the tank, some of it migrates down, sorry, the chamber's right here. Some of the air migrates down across and then into the chamber of seed, and some of that air comes through the top here and it blows out that tube. What we are finding is after several years of running, seed treatments, talc, graphite, what have you, is what we refer to as the lift air, is all the air that comes down along the bottom here is blowing against a screen, and we can start to see the screen down here, but it starts to plug that off. And when we plug that lift air screen, we don't get the flow of seed out to our hoppers at the ends of the rows. So if you got a few birthday candles on your planter, planter's life, take this hose clamp off. Put a shop vac up in there and start pulling out any dry material that's down there. Grab your shop air wand. Put a little air to these silver screens that are shown that you can see right here. While you've got your shop vac pulling from down there, that'll bust any bridge dust and dirt loose, and it'll get that bulk fill system tuned up for you and ready to go. So if you haven't been down that road, a couple years into the life of your planter, a little bit of love and care to your bulk fill system will go a long way. Kind of make sense? Okay. It's a good thing for the longevity of the system. Pardon me?
Tank seals in the off-season.
Okay. Tank seals. Tank seals are the next function of our bulk fill. So there are seals on the bottom and there are seals around the top. If you would, when you clean up your planter at the end of season, unlatch that lid, lift the lid, make sure the tank's clean, close the lid, but forget to latch it. If we latch that lid all winter long, that rubber seal takes a set. I'd rather it not be latched so that rubber seal has open cells and still could crush at the start of the next season. That'll help get you more life and longevity out of it. Over the years, we've changed that latching system. We get a lot of life out of it, but if you can relax that seal, it will help you in the long term. The other thing to look at, if you are still struggling with bulk fill performance, there is a gasket at the bottom of the tank that may need replacing after several seasons. Just little things that we've learned. There's a gasket in here. But that will all help so that we're channeling the air in the right direction to carry that seed out to the ends of the rows for you. Before we start the season, let's talk about the electrical portion of it. Modern planters with electric drive row units have taken a lot of the hydraulic load off of our tractor. It's a beautiful thing, but it takes a little bit of maintenance. This is a Group 31 battery, just like you'd find in your Magnum. This alternator happens to be off of a Magnum also. So we got a lot of commonality. At the start of the season or through the winter, please put a battery maintainer on here. Make sure we start out with a solid performing battery. If we start our second or third or fourth season, and this battery starts out at about 4 volts, you won't know it for the first 50 or 75 acres because this alternator has plenty of capacity. The tractor powers the meters until the bulk fan is running and we're in plant mode, and then it goes to alternator charge. If our battery is not healthy, it'll run off the alternator for about the first 75 to 100 acres. Then it overheats the alternator, then you buy a battery and an alternator. So let's keep it simple. Remember, we got a battery, no different than our tractors. When we pull it out of storage, we might have to put a charge on it. But we start with a healthy battery, then we start with a healthy alternator, and the two work together. We have a successful season. If you are planting along and something goes wrong where we lose 4 rows or a section or half of our planter, our power distribution for those row units are right here. 40 amp fuse block. Quick and simple. If you lose performance of just one row, that's a row unit and backbone harness from that row unit. If we lose groups of rows, this is where we start looking. Kind of makes sense? So when things go wrong, I want you to know where to react. This is a quick and simple. Groups of rows. Okay, it's a little bit about the charging system. Questions? All right, let's keep moving around. If we are running markers on our planter, we do have shear bolt protection. I'd encourage you to have an extra shear bolt or two riding along with your tractor just in case they do pop. If we encounter something with our marker, it will shear and break away and fold. Also have the right wrenches with you. This shear bolt is designed to be torqued to about 75 foot-pounds for it to be at the right yield strength. If it's loose, it'll pop easier. Looking at this planter, I see that it's set up beautifully. It has liquid fertilizer on it, but it's not completely built out yet. Mike's going to visit with us and tell us about where we think we might want to put our liquid fertilizer application. But this planter is already equipped with the wet boom and individual row shutoffs. So the display will shut off flow to each row individually. This particular one, actually this is that's a T-jet flow-by-flow, flow monitoring. So we can monitor the amount of flow going through each row unit. Speaking of row units, let's step over here to the row unit stand. And talk a little bit about it. So this is a sample. When we're hooking our tractor up to our planter, whether it's drawbar mount or 3-point hitch mount, I encourage you to level the draft tube of that planter using your 3-point hitch height until your row unit is parallel with the ground. Usually the long draft tube of the hitch is what people eyeball. The appropriate answer is, I want to make sure my row unit is level. The way that I like to do that, take a level or piece of flat stock from bolt hole to bolt hole and level it here. We do have a curved arm, so it's a little bit deceiving, but when your planter is in the ground at plant height, I want a level line between these two bolts. Most people use the hitch. It'll get you really close, but it can be a little deceiving. What we do with our row unit is, you guys are running red planters. You've invested in the durability of our row unit. From the agronomics of our 1200 series to the 2000 series, our row unit got bigger, heavier, more durable, more capable, more row unit travel. We've got 16 inches of travel, 8 inches up, 8 inches down, so we can follow rolling terrain. Utilizing precision planting components that we can do in pneumatic or hydraulic downforce. When it comes to the mechanics of the row unit itself, our style, we use a leading trailing edge on that disc. So, if I can step back here, let me grab my disc, my opener disc. Our opener disc begins its life at 15 inches. It has a double bevel on it. Big bevel on one side, smaller bevel on the other. That allows me to run this as the leading edge or the trailing edge. I don't have unique part numbers, right side, left side. Starts its life at 15 inches. We want to see a replacement at about 14 and a half. That's where we start to see degradation of the accuracy of our seed trench. But between first season and second season, you can actually take your leading edge, move it to your trailing edge, and get more acres out of your set of discs if you so choose. Something that we do differently, we use a cast iron bearing mount with tapered and opposed bearings. Right now, when this is disassembled, these bearing races are loose. They're just like a wheel bearing set on any wagon or front wheel, non-powered wheel on the farm. When we assemble it, we torque it down, we close those bearing races, and it rolls true. So that's something that we do differently than the aftermarket. From the factory, your blades come with the Earth Metal logo on it. We are now experimenting with a heavy-duty, longer life opener that's not available from the factory yet, but if you're reblading, there is another option. Same thickness of blade, different metallurgy, but the same bearing style and retainer cap. So the crew at the parts counter can help you with that if you're still looking to do a reblade here before spring. We want to get one more season to test on that heavy duty blade before we go to it from the factory. When it comes to setting up our row unit, we do have a shim pack behind each blade, and I want to shim those blades so that I have just a slight amount of gap between them. Generally, I want to be able to take a dollar bill, fold it in half, and drag it from top to bottom and never tear that dollar bill. What I'm getting at there, I want a little bit of gap between those opener blades so that in heavy ground or compacted ground, they don't touch and kiss and grind. But I don't want them so wide that allows soil to start working in between my opener discs. If they're shimmed too wide, we start to get soil in between our opener discs to our furrow forming point, and that starts to have the ability for that dry soil to get into my seed trench, and I don't want that. From the factory, now we have internal and external scrapers for our opener discs. This particular row unit just has the external opener disc. So if you're in some wetter soils, you're trying to chase early planting, non-ideal conditions, and you're getting mud built up between your discs, two things I'm going to talk with you about. Try and shim those down to close what I refer to as the front door. Don't let too much soil in there. And if anything, if you're seeing material start building up in there, through the parts department, we can add those second internal scrapers so anything that starts to accumulate gets knocked off before it starts to get into a plugging situation. I alluded to the fact that there are shims that are in here from the factory. The leading disc comes with 3 shims. The trailing disc comes with 4 shims, and that's generally a really good place to start. Our gauge wheel arm. So our gauge wheel arm. The legacy of the red planter unit is we use the trailing style gauge wheel, and when we are in planting position, I want that gauge wheel to be shimmed, again, shim washers, so that I'm really close to my disc, but I'm not on it so heavily that when I roll the gauge wheel, it actually turns the disc. I don't want a direct rubber drive, one-to-one drive, but I want it to kind of catch and drag a little bit. Just like the opener discs, if those are shimmed too wide, I start getting material behind my gauge wheel and I can start to get into some plugging scenarios. Anybody experienced that before? Yes? No? In the aftermarket for many years, there was a spoked gauge wheel option to the point where we now have that from the factory as well. Our words of caution there, if you have spoke gauge wheels, it's great, it lets material out. It also lets material in. So mixed emotions on that, but you know your soils best. This row unit's very adaptable for you. As we get our disc shimmed correctly, our gauge wheel shimmed correctly, we keep moving our way back that row unit. Let's talk for a minute about our depth control system. Our depth control operates to the front of the row unit, works off the gauge wheel arms. Your depth handle has a tapered edge to it. It has a flat edge to it. You see how the handle has that difference in marking? This handle is actually offset, so the tapered edges forward toward the row unit or backward toward the closing system vary your planting depth by 1/8 of an inch. Otherwise, each combination between your alpha and your numerics, when you step that up and down, you're moving at 1/4 of an inch of depth at a time. So you have the ability to plant into moisture and be very fine-tuned based on the handle configuration. So just pay attention to that. Make sure that something didn't get disassembled, reassembled incorrectly. When you rebuild your row unit after several seasons, or when it's time to put discs on it, I will encourage you to zero out or do a zero calibration on your row unit. In the aftermarket, there's a seed setting stand If you want to spend a few bucks and buy that, you can. If not, I like to use just a simple 2x4. Jack your row unit up, set your depth handle for 1.5 inches, because we all know a 2x4 is not 2x4 anymore. Let that 2x4 hold your gauge wheel up, and then look to see underneath there. So I usually start with a steel plate, 2x4 under each wheel, set my depth to 1.5 inches, and see if my discs are actually touching. If they are not touching, then my handle accuracy is not where it needs to be. They're behind this black cast arm. If we pull this pin off, there is an Allen head in there. We can utilize a separate setting arm to replace this black arm that has a hole through the center of it, so I can put a long Allen handle in there, and I can adjust my depth screw to zero that out. So after thousands of acres through the row unit, or changing out the wear parts, it's maybe not a bad idea. The crew here at Hull Brothers is going to verify that the factory had it set correctly. When it's new, it's easy to know how it starts, but when we get several thousand acres into the life of a planter, you guys, the more accuracy that you set up and time that you take to prepare, you're going to have better planting performance and even consistent row unit performance to get to that optimum yield potential out of your crop. Make sense on depth control? Okay, hopefully we all learned something there. Closing system. We use 2 inverted closing discs, and our whole goal is, as I'm using the back of those closing discs, is to just zip that seed trench back shut. But I don't want these to be tillage. I expect to get at least the life of 2 opener discs, maybe 3 out of a set of closing discs. As I go visit a planter that's got some acres on it, I look on the inside to see how deep the wear marks are on the inside. If these closing discs are polished on the inside all the way to the rivets, I bet you $1 you're running too much closing pressure. What that starts to do is that starts to take that perfectly formed seed trench, push it, squeeze it, and start to actually do tillage of that freshly placed seed. It can start to affect seed depth and start to affect seed spacing. So when you're in the cab, if you have the pneumatic closing system, start with small numbers. We like to see 15 or 20 pounds on our closing system. We don't want to see a lot. All the tillage has been done up to this point. Now, if I'm out planting double crop beans or I'm in heavier soils, maybe I need to take that up to make sure I'm closing that seed trench. From the factory, we have smooth discs, or we also now have a serrated, rotary fingered serrated closing disc. That helps to get us a little bit more shatter of that sidewall of that seed trench, if your soil type justifies it. But the things to be aware of, stay away from too much closer pressure unless digging behind the planter justifies it, because it can have a negative effect on seed placement. After we close the trench, we use our semi-pneumatic firming wheel to help put a firm mound of soil over that newly placed seed. There are some adjustments on this as well. Simplest adjustment, we have 2 wheel positions. If you're doing a lot of no-till, or you're doing a minimum till where you've got root balls, if you find residue that is plugging this narrow gap, we can move the wheel back. If we're doing the wrong things agronomically and planting into some moist soil conditions and we start to see mud buildup on the wheel, we can move that to the back. Sometimes we have to sacrifice some things. We'd prefer not to be out there those days. We have adjustability on the closing pressure if we're using spring closing pressure. 2 different pinholes And if we're moving the wheel to the rearward position, we can even go to a heavier spring back here if we so need it. So there's a lot of adjustability. If you have questions, work with Randy and Brian, the crew here at Hulls. They know your soil types very well. They can get you in the right direction to get you a good starting place. Questions? We're running through a lot of this info really quick. What questions do you have? For the guys that have put a few seasons on their planters already, anything that you've experienced that you want to dive into? If you're running bulk fill planters and you're starting to see where the splitter to its neighboring row is starting to bridge some seed on your older planters, there is a revised snorkel here that gets rid of this 90-degree break and is now a smoother joint, which can help with that. That's what's in production now. So we're always refining our product. So little things to be aware of. On the bulk fill planters, let's take a second and talk about it. This is our mini hopper. Seed comes down in. There's a little snorkel. We get down into this. This is where we have that small reservoir of seed, if you're not familiar with bulk fill planting. We utilize perforations in the cover to help exhaust that air that's blowing seed into this mini hopper. Make sense? All right. Since you guys didn't ask the question, I'll ask usually the question that we get. Has anyone ever had an issue with potentially a stone getting caught right down in here? Yes. We don't like to talk about it, but it happens, right? What have you done to overcome that? Have you found a trick? Have you found anything that works for you? What's that? Row cleaners out front, okay? So you're using a deterrent out front. That's step number one. It makes a big difference, right? So, different styles of row cleaners out front to help usher that rock away from our row unit. So we're not running it under our gauge wheel and starting to pack it in and jeopardizing that seed trench. Perfect, that's step number one. Step number two, if you are running into that, I would encourage you to consider lightening up your closer pressure. If you're running excessive closer pressure, you're actually forcing that rock deeper into the soil where it's going to start plowing. If we are running softer on our spring setting or our air setting, there's a better chance that it will trip and eject that rock. If that still doesn't fix the problem, excuse me here, step over. We've been testing and have released a casting that relocates the position of our closing discs. And what it does is it gives me 2 points to increase the stagger between my discs. And it has a flat bottom to it where it does a better job of tripping that to expel that rock. Whereas the original one has an arch underneath here that helps to cup that rock. So that would really be the third step if you're still struggling with it. For the planters that have had a few years on them, we have changed our casting where we went from a through pin to a true bearing in here now. So if that through pin shows enough acres, starts to get wallered out, now we can go to a repair kit that has a drillable bushing and a bearing, so it locks in there, and then that rock protection as well. So there's ways that we can breathe new life, new features into those row units that have thousands of acres on them already. When we do this, by going to that staggered disc position, then I want to make sure my wheel moves back, because this disc moves back also. So the system's got to work together. Kind of makes sense? Guys, it's been a high-speed trip around the planter. Unless you've got direct questions, I'm going to say this is probably the time we'll disband. Let's go find some lunch. And then, I'm sorry, no, Mike's up next, right? Grab a drink, find your seat, and we're going to dive into